Okay, so today we're going to be looking at Module 2.1, and this is going to be Part A. So this is going to be a two-part section of 2.1. And so we're going to talk today about modeling with expressions. And so our focus today is going to be interpreting, and that needs to say parts, parts of an expression, such as terms, factors, and coefficients. So we're going to be looking at those three things specifically and how they go along with expressions, and how we can recognize them and identify them. Okay, so before we start getting into the different parts of an expression and what they specifically are, we want to take a second to recognize that there are two different types of expressions. So you have numerical expressions and you have algebraic expressions. So as far as numerical expressions are concerned, both types of expressions contain both what we call operations, and so that's adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So those are all different operations that an expression can have. And so over here we have the same thing. So we have multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Now, the other thing that's contained in a numerical expression is just numbers. So when you look at a numerical expression, the whole idea of it being a numerical expression is that it's just numbers. But with algebraic expressions, the difference is that we have variables and combination of numbers or whatever we want to. So as long as there is just one variable there, it constitutes as an algebraic expression. So you have a variable here, a variable here. The rest of them are just numbers that are surrounding different parts, but it still makes it up as an algebraic expression. Okay, so now we need to look at identifying the different parts of an expression, and how these things come together. The first thing that we have with an algebraic expression or an expression in general is something that we call terms, coefficients, and then we'll talk about the different factors that are involved. But specifically, these two things will show up in every single expression. Alright, so we're going to be looking at what a term is. So a term by definition is just a part of an expression, but we recognize it as being separated by addition and subtraction. And so if we look at our expression that we have here, we have 18 minus 2x minus 4y. Now you learned before in previous classes that we can rewrite all subtraction as addition. So in reality, we don't really want to say that it's separated by addition or subtraction. We simply want to just say that it's separated by addition. Because if I rewrite this in a different form, this is 18 plus negative 2x plus negative 4y. And so the way that this works is that this here is a term, here negative 2x is a term, and negative 4y is a term. So when we look at terms, we look at the different pieces of an expression that are separated by some kind of operation, such as addition or subtraction. We don't talk about it being separated by multiplication, only separated by addition and subtraction. But as we saw before, we always want to incorporate that negative or that subtraction with that previous or that next part of the expression. Now, if you look at the rest of this, there are different pieces that are involved. So one idea is that we have to start identifying terms. So 18 is a term, negative 2x is a term, and negative 4y. These are all terms, but inside these terms they have different pieces to them. One, you obviously see that we have variables. Now obviously we know what variables are. Variables are placeholders for specific values that we're waiting for. So we have a y and we have an x. Now because these have a variable in them, these are also known as what we call variable terms. These are just terms in general, so it's just a value, but we have variable terms specifically talking about terms that have a variable in them. Now the number that's in front of them plays a big part, and that is what is known as coefficients. Now coefficients are basically just numerical factors. Now numerical factors, so just kind of piggyback off of this, factors are just parts of multiplication. So whenever you think of multiplication, it's basically you're taking two numbers and putting them together, and each one of those pieces are factors. So it's basically a numerical factor of what we call a variable term. And so when you think about it, the variable or the factor of the variable term, which changes how much it is this -2 and this -4. Those are specifically the coefficients. So when we're looking at coefficients, you can kind of think of it as the number multiplied in front of the variable, but you have to understand that they're working together to give you a total kind of respect of what this entire thing is being. So we have regular terms, we have variable terms, and we have coefficients. We should be able to identify those at this point. So if we go ahead and we look at this specific expression that we have here, 2x plus 3y minus 4z plus 10, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to identify all the terms that are involved here. So just like what we did before when we were kind of solving equations, what I like to do is I like to use boxes and I like to use circles and different shapes and stuff to identify different terms. So for example, here we have our first term of 2x, so there is one of those terms. The next one we have is positive 3y, so I'll go ahead and write that one over here too as well. Now the next one that we have negative 4z. That is also a term, so negative 4z. And then the last one that we have here is this positive 10, and so I'll put positive 10 over here, and those are the four terms of this expression. So notice that I'm looking for those things separated by operations but keeping the operations with them, but it's only addition subtraction that I'm interested in. I'm not interested in the multiplication because the multiplication comes from the coefficients. So if I look at each term individually, if I look at the 2x here, the first one that I would have, a coefficient, would be 2. The next coefficient that I have as part of being 3y would be the 3. And then the next coefficient that I have that's part of a variable term is -4. So notice that the coefficients only come from the terms that have variables, or what we call variable terms. Now the factors of these terms, the idea is that we can recognize each one of these, and I'll write this over here. So 2x has a factor. If you remember some of the factor trees that you used to deal with, your two factors are 2 times x. So you have those two things there. With -4z, our two factors are -4 and z, so that we can see that in that respect. 3y kind of plays along the same line. It's 3 and it's y. So the idea is that we're recognizing that they're two different pieces, even though it's regarding only one specific item, which is a variable term. So we have terms, are the entire groups. Coefficients talk about what's just multiplying, and then the factors are just breaking those two things up, showing the number and the variable. Okay, so the way that we would start using this is that we would start using this to dissect a word problem. And it's important because we need to understand what all of these numbers and all of these kind of unknown items represent and how they get put together. So if you read through this word problem, it says that tickets to an amusement park are $60 for adults and $30 for children. If A is the number of adults that we're going to have and C is the number of children that we have, then the cost for adults and children is represented by this specific expression right here, 60A and 30C. Now before we start even really looking into what this is all about, the idea is that we want to identify what the terms are. So the terms that we have specifically in this problem are 60A and 30C. The factors of 60A are 60 and A, and the factors of 30C are 30 and C. Now the idea is that this does seem pretty simple and it seems pretty straightforward, but it's the idea of understanding what these pieces are and how they're coming into play, where we see A as being adults and C as being children, and these two values, these two numbers, are being multiplied together. There's a specific reason that those values are being represented and put together, and we'll look at that here on the next slide. And so when we look at these terms specifically, and this is kind of the introduction of what we're going to be doing over the next couple of days, is that we have 80 or 60A and 30C. And if you look at the original problem, we have $60 for adults and we have $30 per child. And so the idea behind this is the reason that these have factors is that the 60 represents how much it costs for each individual adult, and then A represents the total number of adults that we have. So the idea is that this is kind of a rate at which we are purchasing tickets, so that I tell you the number of A, you multiply it by 60, that tells me the total amount for all adults. And so that's what this specific term actually represents. It's this total amount of money that it's going to cost for all adults to go into the park. And then you're simply adding that with the cost of children, because it's the same idea. You have 30 times C, it's $30 for every child. You tell me the number of children, and I would give you the total amount for all children. And most of you should be able to kind of understand that it's this idea of it's this total cost, and it even says that it's the total cost, but it's the idea of looking at the coefficients, realizing that's kind of a multiplier, because A just represents the number of tickets, and it's not really a cost to a ticket. That cost and the amount that you have are put together, and that's what gives us our expression. So looking at coefficients as being multipliers and variables as just being a number of objects that you have helps you kind of understand how to set up and solve for word problems. But we'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to introduce that idea to you now before we kind of went along with that. And so just a couple of things as we kind of finish this up. Remember to know the definition of terms and coefficients, what they are, how they're separated. Remember, terms are separated by addition and subtraction. Coefficients are multipliers, so that when we're looking at those are always along with the variables. So coefficients and variables go hand in hand. We're identifying the different parts of an expression, which again are terms and coefficients. Those are the two most important parts of an expression, is the terms and the coefficients, because they go together. And then just realizing that all of this stuff works together to kind of formulate a final process so that we can understand a little bit more about what these numbers represent and how they are represented in the first place. So that's going to do that for this video, and then we'll see you next time.